The wind moved gently through the tall prairie grass, carrying with it the scent of smoke, dust, and the fading warmth of a frontier day. People in those old American lands believed the wind always carried stories. Some whispered from the mountains, some buried beneath the trails carved by wagon wheels, and a few held so tightly in the hearts of those who had suffered too much to speak. One such story belonged to a widowed Apache man who had turned his back on war, and a young woman the world seemed to forget before she ever had the chance to be seen. Their paths were never meant to meet, yet fate in the frontier never cared for what people planned. It only cared for what was true. He had lost everything long before this story began. His wife had been taken by sickness that swept the valley during a harsh winter, and for a long time after that, he lived in silence. People in the nearby settlements spoke of him with a mixture of respect and distance. They said he was a skilled hunter, a strong protector, a man with a proud spirit, but someone who carried too much pain in his chest to let anyone near. He lived alone in a small lodge hidden between cedar trees and red stone cliffs, far enough from the settlements to keep his memories untouched. Some believed he preferred it that way. Others whispered that he stayed away because his heart was still buried beneath the winter that took his wife from him. That sorrow shaped him into someone quiet and strong, someone who watched the world more than he spoke to it. In those same lands lived a young woman who had never known safety. Folks in town rarely said her name, but they spoke of her situation often. She was the forgotten daughter no one wanted, left behind after her own family drifted away one by one. Some from the town pitied her. Others used the word trouble when they talked about her, mostly because they did not understand her or the loneliness she carried. She grew up watching others build homes, start families, and find happiness, while she remained on the edges of every place she stepped into. She worked where she could, slept where someone offered space, and kept her head down so no one would notice the hurt she hid behind her steady eyes. The townspeople saw her as someone without worth, but what they failed to see was the strength she carried from surviving so much without a hand to help her. The old American frontier was harsh like that. It lifted some up, broke others, and tested everyone in its own wild way. The forgotten daughter had learned to accept the dust on her clothes and the cold glances from people who had no idea what she went through simply to make it through each day. Even so, she kept a small spark of hope inside her. She often looked toward the distant hills, imagining a life where she did not have to keep begging for a place to sleep or pretending nothing hurt. She wished for a home, even if she had to build it herself. She wished for belonging, even if she had to find it far from the people who never cared for her. Those wishes stayed with her, soft but steady. As she walked through each passing season, everything changed. The day trouble found its way into the valley. A dispute broke out between some settlers and a traveler who had been drinking too much. The man caused chaos at the small trading post, frightening the animals and knocking over a stack of supplies. No one stopped him until he turned his anger toward the forgotten daughter who had been helping the owner of the post. She tried to keep calm, but he cornered her with a look in his eyes that made her heart shake. The people nearby watched but hesitated, unsure whether to interfere. The frontier was known for its dangers, yet there were times when fear made even strong men step back. Before anything worse could happen, the widowed Apache appeared. He had come down from the cliffs to trade a bundle of pelts, but instead found the scene unfolding in front of him. He stepped between the young woman and the troublemaker, without saying a word. The strength in his stance made the drunk traveler pause before stumbling away. The moment passed quickly, yet it marked the first time the widowed Apache looked directly into the eyes of the woman who felt invisible to the world. In that brief exchange, something stirred inside him. He recognized the same kind of loneliness he had carried for years, the same quiet pain, the same sense of not belonging anywhere. She tried to thank him, but the Apache man gave a silent nod and walked away as though he could not allow himself to feel anything more. She watched him disappear into the fading light, wondering how a man who seemed so strong could carry a sadness so deep it almost felt like a shadow behind him. She did not know then that he would soon become the person fate chose to change the course of her life. She also did not know that he walked back to his lodge thinking of her soft voice and the way her fear had been hidden behind bravery. Days turned into weeks, and life in the valley continued with the same rhythm. Yet something had shifted between them. She found reasons to walk near the cedar trees, telling herself she was gathering herbs or searching for firewood. He noticed her presence more often than he admitted to himself. He would pause from sharpening his arrows or tending to his fire when he sensed her nearby. At first, he remained distant, unsure whether the ache he felt was simply the memory of his lost wife or the beginning of something new. She, on the other hand, felt drawn to him in a way she could not explain. It was not just gratitude. It was the first time in her life someone had protected her without wanting something in return. People in town began whispering once they saw her walking toward the hills more often. Some claimed she was chasing trouble again. Others said the widowed Apache must have put strange thoughts in her mind. The frontier was full of opinions, most of them unkind, but she ignored what anyone said. She followed the quiet tug in her heart, the one that told her the truth lived somewhere beyond judgment. Somewhere in the wild land where the Apache man kept his lonely fire burning. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned golden, she gathered enough courage to step closer to his lodge. She hesitated at the doorway, unsure whether she was welcome. The Apache man stood inside, watching her with calm eyes that held more emotion than his words ever would. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could say anything, the distant sound of horses echoed across the valley. The earth beneath them trembled slightly. Something or someone was approaching with purpose. The Apache man stepped outside, his expression turning serious as he scanned the horizon. She felt a shiver run down her spine. The air changed, heavy with an unknown tension that made her heart race. He motioned for her to stay close, and for the first time, she sensed that whatever waited beyond those hills was about to pull them both into something larger than either of them could control. She did not know whether the approaching riders were friend or threat. She did not know that this moment would tie her fate to the widowed Apache in ways neither could undo. All she knew was that the world was about to shift, and the quiet safety she thought she found near him was about to be tested in a way that would push them both to the edge of everything they believed. And as the thunder of hooves grew louder, she realized this was only the beginning of a story she had never imagined she would be part of. The sound of hooves grew, heavier until it felt like the whole valley was holding its breath. Dust lifted in the distance, swirling into the golden sky. The forgotten daughter stood beside the widowed Apache, feeling the ground tremble beneath her worn boots. She kept her hands close to her chest, unsure whether she should hide inside the lodge or stay near him. He did not speak, but his steady posture made her feel safer than anyone else ever had. His eyes followed the trail rising over the ridge, his face carved with calm strength and something deeper, something unreadable. She tried to ask who it might be, but the words caught in her throat. The Apache man lifted one hand slightly, signaling her to stay quiet. She obeyed without question. She had never followed another person's lead so easily, yet something about him felt trustworthy, almost protective in a way she had long forgotten existed. The riders finally came into view, silhouettes against the burning sky. There were 3 of them, moving fast, and the way they gripped their reins made it clear they were not just travelers. They were riding with purpose, maybe even with warning. The Apache man stepped forward as they slowed near the clearing. The horses snorted and shook their heads, kicking dirt. The riders wore rough frontier coats, dust-covered hats, and carried rifles slung over their shoulders. Their expressions were tense, the kind people wore when danger chased them close behind. The man in front nodded at the Apache in a way that showed respect, maybe even old familiarity. He said they had been riding up from the south. Trail and spotted signs of trouble spread across the lower valley. They spoke of a group moving through the region, men known for stirring fear wherever they passed. These men claimed land that was not theirs, fought anyone who stood in their path, and took supplies from settlers and travelers. Hearing this made the forgotten daughter tense. She had seen enough hardship in life to know what desperate men could do, especially to a woman alone. The riders explained that these men were headed somewhere near the northern ridge and might cross into the lands the Apache man called home. They warned that more people might be at risk if the group was not watched carefully. Their words carried something heavy, something that hinted at danger that was not far away. After sharing all they knew, The riders turned their horses and continued toward the next settlement, hoping to warn others before nightfall. When the sound of hooves faded again, the valley grew quiet. The forgotten daughter looked at the widowed Apache with questions filling her eyes. He did not answer right away. He returned to the fire outside his lodge, feeding a small branch into the glowing embers. She followed him slowly, unsure whether she should stay or leave him alone. Her heart felt torn between fear and a strange sense of belonging she had never known before meeting him. He finally spoke, saying the land had grown restless lately. He mentioned that he had seen tracks near the river days before, tracks that did not belong to travelers or hunters. He had ignored them then, believing they would pass without trouble, but now it seemed the danger had grown larger than he expected. She listened quietly, watching the fire dance across his strong features. There was something about his voice that carried both strength and sorrow, a mix that made her wonder how much he had survived before this moment. He asked why she had come toward his lodge that day. She looked away for a moment, trying to find the right words. She told him she had grown tired of the town, tired of the looks people gave her, tired of feeling unwanted in a place she was forced to call home. She said she came because the hills gave her peace, and the cedar trees felt kinder than the people who whispered behind her back. She did not expect him to understand, but he did. More than she realized, he told her that pain could shape a person in two ways. It could harden them, leaving them bitter, or it could make them stronger in quiet ways. He said he saw strength in her, the kind that reminded him of the land itself. She felt warmth spread through her chest, not from the fire, but from the simple truth in his words. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. No one had ever seen her like that. For a long time they sat in silence, listening to the flicker of the flames and the soft hum of insects settling into the night. The wind brushed past them, carrying the scent of pine and distant river water. She wondered if she should return to town before dark, but the thought of walking back alone made her uneasy. He sensed her worry before she spoke it aloud. He said she could stay near the lodge until morning. The simple offer made her heart settle. She nodded, grateful for the first bit of safety she had felt in years. As darkness covered the valley, placed another log on the fire and checked the edges of the clearing. He moved with quiet confidence, as though he had been guarding these lands long before she ever set foot on them. She watched him from the firelight, noticing how his muscles moved like they were carved from the earth itself. He carried the spirit of a warrior, yet his eyes held the softness of someone who knew deep loss. She wondered how he had survived losing his wife, how he had endured so much pain alone. He returned to sit across from her, giving her space but also making sure she felt safe. She wrapped her arms around herself as the night cooled. He handed her a blanket made of thick woven fabric, warm and soft. She hesitated before taking it, touched by his kindness. No one in town had ever shown her such simple care without expecting something in return. The fire crackled softly. She asked whether he believed the trouble would reach his lodge. He answered honestly, saying he did not know, but the frontier always taught people to be ready. She nodded. Growing up forgotten had taught her the same lesson. The world was unpredictable, and sometimes danger came when a person least expected it. She found herself studying him, wondering what made him choose this quiet life instead of living near his people or the settlers. He explained that after his wife passed, he needed space to understand who he was without her. He said the cliffs and cedar trees offered him peace the world had taken away. She understood more than she expected. They were two different people with two different pasts. Yet something in their lives matched in a quiet way. Like two wounded spirits recognizing each other, he asked about her childhood, but she struggled to speak about it. She told him enough for him to understand she had been pushed aside most of her life. He listened without judgment, his expression steady and sincere. She felt a strange comfort unfold inside her, something she had never felt with anyone before. Their conversation slowly faded as the fire grew lower. She wrapped the blanket tighter and rested her back against a large stone near the lodge. The night wind whispered through the branches, and somewhere in the distance an owl called out. The Apache man rose once more, checking the shadows around the clearing. His calm movements made her feel secure, yet she sensed he feared something he had not yet spoken aloud. He paused suddenly, eyes fixed on the trees beyond the firelight. She followed his gaze, feeling a sudden coldness settle across her shoulders. The woods looked ordinary, yet there was something different about the air. She could not hear the usual sounds of night insects. The stillness felt almost unnatural. He stepped forward quietly, the way a hunter moves when something is wrong. She held her breath, waiting for him to say what he sensed. The valley had a way of hiding danger until the last moment, and tonight felt no different. Her pulse quickened. She did not know what was watching from the shadows, but she knew something was there, and as he tightened his grip on the wooden spear by the lodge, she knew the trouble the riders warned about was far closer than either of them expected. The widowed Apache stood completely still, his eyes fixed on the dark line of trees where the firelight could not reach. The forgotten daughter watched him, her breath caught in her throat. The warmth of the blanket no longer enough to steady her nerves. She could feel something shifting in the night air, something far heavier than simple fear. The old American frontier had always carried danger, yet this felt different. It felt personal, as if the valley itself was warning them that something had arrived. He lifted one hand again, telling her without words to stay behind him. She obeyed, though every part of her wanted to move closer. The fire crackled softly, casting long shadows across the lodge and the nearby rocks. He stepped into the edge of the darkness, listening carefully. The forgotten daughter strained her ears, but heard nothing except the rustle of distant branches. Still, she trusted his instincts more than her own. A man who spent his life on Apache lands knew the whispers of danger far better than any settler or forgotten soul from town. After a tense moment, he returned to the fire with a troubled look. He told her that someone had been watching, someone who knew how to move quietly through the woods. He said the tracks he had seen earlier in the week were not the only signs of strangers. The forgotten daughter felt her heart thump harder at the thought that danger had already reached the hills. She knew what trouble could do. She had seen enough cruelty from desperate men in her short life to understand how quickly things could go wrong. He suggested they keep the fire low and remain alert. She nodded, feeling small in the large world around them. As the night deepened, the wind grew stronger, carrying the scent of faraway smoke. It mingled with the fresh pine and dust, creating a strange mix that made her uneasy. She wondered who those riders from earlier had been running from. She wondered if the danger from the south had reached them already. The Apache man sat by the fire again, sharpening a stone blade slowly. His movements were steady, calm, yet she could sense the tension beneath his calm surface. She asked him what he thought the strangers wanted. He replied that men who traveled at night through Apache territory rarely brought good intentions. He said some groups moved through the land, stealing horses, supplies, or anything they considered valuable. Others stirred conflict purposely, hoping to claim land that did not belong to them. She listened carefully, learning more about the land than she ever had while living in town. Still, she sensed something else hiding behind his words, something he was not fully saying. She wondered if he feared the past returning, or if he sensed a threat greater than he wished to admit. His quiet nature made it difficult to read him, yet his eyes spoke louder than any words. She saw a hint of old pain mixed with a new sense of responsibility. He was not just protecting his home. He was protecting her too. Hours passed slowly, and though nothing more moved in the woods, the fear lingered in the air. The forgotten daughter felt sleep tug at her, but she stayed awake beside him. She did not want to be caught unaware. She forced herself to watch the tree line, even though the shadows played tricks on her eyes. She felt safer near him, though she did not say it aloud. His presence made the world feel less cold, less threatening, even in the dark. When the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, the Apache man finally relaxed his posture. He told her the danger had passed for now, though he did not believe it was gone. She wrapped the blanket around herself and stood slowly, her legs stiff from worry. The valley looked peaceful again under the rising sun, yet she knew that calm could be broken at any moment. He offered her water from a clay pot he kept near the lodge. She thanked him softly. Her voice cracked slightly from the long night, but he did not mention it. Instead, he asked if she wanted to return to town or remain near the lodge a little longer. The question made her chest tighten. She thought about the cold looks she received there, the whispered insults, the empty nights spent wishing for a home that never existed. She looked at the hills around the lodge, the quiet trees, the simple fire, and the man who had shown her more kindness than anyone in years. She chose to stay just a little longer. He did not question her choice. Together, they prepared a small meal, using supplies he kept stored inside the lodge. She helped him gather water from a nearby spring while he checked for signs of tracks around the clearing. She noticed how careful he was, how he paid attention to the smallest details. He studied the ground as though it held secrets only he understood. She realized how much danger he had faced in life, how much wisdom he carried from years of surviving the harsh frontier. During the morning, they walked the edge of the hills, looking for signs of who might have approached during the night. The forgotten daughter watched him kneel by a cluster of broken branches. He touched the bark gently, then pointed to the faint marks on the ground. He said someone had passed through, moving quietly, likely watching the lodge from a distance. She felt a chill. She asked him if he recognized the tracks. He shook his head and said they were old enough to fade, but fresh enough to be troubling. He believed more than one person was involved. She asked whether it could be someone from town. He answered that settlers moved differently, and these tracks belonged to men who knew how to hunt, hide, and move fast. She realized then that the threat was bigger than she imagined. Whoever had passed through the woods was not lost. They were searching for something or someone as they walked back. The forgotten daughter asked him if he ever felt truly safe on this land. He answered honestly. He said safety in the frontier was never guaranteed. Not for him, not for settlers, not for anyone who lived between the wild hills and the open plains. He said survival was about listening to the land, trusting instincts, and protecting what mattered. She felt his words settled deep inside her. She wondered if she mattered enough for him to protect. By midday, the sky had turned clear, yet the tension never left. He showed her how to gather certain herbs for food and medicine, teaching her how to identify leaves and roots that save lives during harsh winters. She listened closely, wanting to learn something useful. For the first time in her life, she felt like someone believed she was capable of more than people in town claimed. While gathering herbs near a creek, she asked him about his wife, though she feared she might have overstepped. He paused, his hands still for a moment. He said his wife had been brave, gentle, and kind, someone who brought warmth into every season. Speaking about her made his voice softer, almost fragile. The forgotten daughter felt a pang of guilt, worried she had stirred old wounds. But he assured her that remembering his wife hurt less than forgetting she existed. She realized then how deep his loneliness ran. As the sun dipped lower again, they reached the lodge. He prepared his weapons more carefully than usual, checking the edges of every blade. His movements were sharper now, more alert. She noticed the way he watched the hills, the way he scanned the horizon for danger. He was preparing for something the land had whispered but not yet shown. When the wind shifted that evening, carrying the faint smell of distant smoke again, the forgotten daughter knew trouble was coming. The Apache man felt it too. He stood beside her, the fire casting light across his strong features. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing on both of them. Then, far across the ridge, a single echo rang out. It was faint, but unmistakable. A signal or a warning, she could not tell. But the Apache warrior understood it instantly. His expression tightened. He said the group from the south was closer than expected, and they were not alone. The forgotten daughter felt her heart stop as he stepped forward. Gripping his spear, he told her danger was coming fast and nothing about the valley would be the same after tonight. Sound that drifted across the ridge carried a weight that made the forgotten daughter's heart pound against her ribs. It wasn't loud, but it traveled with purpose, a faint crack that echoed through the valley like a warning. The widowed Apache listened with a stillness that made the moment feel even more dangerous. His jaw tightened as he looked toward the distant hills. She could tell he recognized the meaning behind that sound in a way she didn't fully understand. He said men used signals like that when they wanted to gather or warn each other. He added that whoever had sent it was closer than either of them thought. She felt a cold, not curling in her stomach as she watched him step away from the fire and examine the trail leading toward the ridge. She followed, her steps light, but filled with worry. He stopped and studied the prints in the dirt, then shook his head slowly. There were more tracks now, far more than the ones they found the previous day. That meant the group had grown larger, or others had joined them. The forgotten daughter tried to steady her breathing. She had lived with fear before, but nothing like this. She felt the weight of danger closing in, not just on her life, but on his as well. She couldn't explain why the thought of something happening to him shook her so deeply. She had barely begun to understand him, yet he already felt like the only person who saw her as more than a burden. He told her they needed to stay close to the lodge, till he could learn more. She nodded, though part of her wanted to run far from the valley. But leaving him alone felt wrong, even frightening in its own way. She stayed by his side as he gathered supplies, checked his weapons, and prepared for what might come. She watched him with growing worry, noticing how focused he became. How his eyes followed every small movement in the trees. A storm of tension built in the air. Even the birds stayed quiet, as if they sensed the same danger. When the wind shifted again, bringing the smell of distant smoke, she knew the threat was moving closer. She asked him if he thought the riders from the south were coming directly toward them. He answered that he was sure of it now. The path through the valley led straight past his lodge. Men looking for trouble rarely chose a different route. They stayed awake long after the sun dipped behind the hills. The forgotten daughter tried to help by gathering dry branches and tending the small fire, keeping it low so it wouldn't draw attention. The Apache man moved through the clearing with careful steps, checking the shadows, listening for anything unusual. She admired how calm he stayed despite the danger. His steady presence made her feel less alone, even as fear pressed against her chest. Near midnight, he paused suddenly. She froze, watching him turn toward the dark ridge. For a moment, there was nothing. Then she heard it too. A low rumble. Horses. More than one. The sound rolled through the valley, growing clearer with every second. The forgotten daughter felt her knees weaken. He placed a hand lightly on her shoulder, not to comfort her, but to remind her to stay quiet. The horses slowed near the tree line. She could see faint shapes moving beyond the brush. The Apache man stepped back into the shadows, pulling her with him. They watched as 3 riders appeared through the dark. The men carried rifles across their backs, their clothes worn and rough, their faces hard with the look of people who took what they wanted without asking. One of them pointed toward the lodge, and the others nodded. Her heart sank. They were coming. The riders did not approach immediately. Instead, they lingered near the clearing, as if scouting or waiting for a signal. The Apache man whispered that more of them were nearby. He could sense it from the way the horses behaved and how cautious the men were. She clutched the blanket around her tighter, trembling as the riders dismounted. One of them walked closer to the fire pit, kicking at the ash left from earlier. He studied the ground like he was tracking someone. The forgotten daughter realized they were searching for them. She looked at the Apache man, fear widening her eyes. He motioned for her to stay low, then moved silently toward the side of the lodge. Even with her fear, she couldn't help but admire how he moved, how every step was quiet as the night itself. He carried the spirit of someone who had survived countless dangers. She prayed his strength would be enough to protect them both. The riders whispered among themselves, their voices rough from long travels. She couldn't make out everything, but she heard one mention taking supplies. Another talked about claiming what they found. The idea of these men finding her sent a cold shock through her. She wasn't sure what they wanted, but she had seen enough cruelty to imagine the worst. Minutes passed like hours. The riders finally mounted their horses again and moved deeper into the valley. The Apache man watched them until the shadows swallowed their figures completely. Only when the last footstep faded did he return to her side. He told her they needed to move before the riders circled back. Staying near the lodge was no longer safe. Her heart thudded at the idea of leaving. She had just begun to feel comfortable there, but she knew he was right. The danger was too close. He said they would travel through the cedar forest where the trees were thick and the paths narrow. It would be harder for riders to follow them there. She trusted him without hesitation. They gathered what little they could carry. Packing water, a few tools, and enough food for a short journey. The forgotten daughter wrapped the blanket around her shoulders as they stepped into the darkness of the forest. The moon cast soft light across the ground, guiding their steps between tall trunks and low branches. She followed close behind him, afraid to lose sight of him even for a second. As they walked deeper, she noticed he kept glancing at her, checking that she was all right. She felt cared for in a way she never had before, and the feeling settled warm in her chest despite the fear surrounding them. Yet every sound, every crack of a twig, made her jump. The forest was alive with hidden noises. He reassured her quietly, telling her the woods were safer than the open valley. Still, she sensed something following them. Several times she thought she heard footsteps behind them, but when she turned, there was only darkness. The Apache man noticed her unease and slowed his pace to stay closer to her. He said the danger was not behind them yet, but the valley was restless. He believed the riders were trying to drive someone toward the northern ridge, possibly them. His voice carried a tension she had never heard from him before. They finally reached a sheltered spot. Beneath large boulders and trees that twisted overhead, he said they would rest for a moment. She sat near him, trying to calm her breathing. The forest felt cold and heavy, but at least they were hidden. She watched him examine the ground and scan the shadows again. He moved with purpose, yet she could see the weight of responsibility on his face. He wasn't just protecting himself. He was protecting her too. She whispered a question, asking why he hadn't sent her back to town where the streets were busier and the danger might not reach her. He shook his head and told her the riders would likely pass through the town anyway. He added that he couldn't leave her behind now. The simple truth in his words sent warmth through her chest. She realized he cared for her in ways she had not fully understood yet. Before she could respond, another distant noise echoed through the trees. Not horses this time. Something else. A sharp crack in the night, followed by the sound of movement coming fast from the ridge. He stood immediately, his muscles tense. His spear held tight. The sound grew louder. Something was coming straight toward them, and there was nowhere left to run. The forgotten daughter felt her heart stop when the sound rushed toward them through the dark trees. Branches broke under hurried steps, and the wind carried the weight of someone running. The widowed Apache moved in front of her, his body tense with readiness. She crouched behind one of the large boulders, clutching the blanket around her shoulders as the shadows shifted wildly. The noise grew louder until it reached the small clearing where they stood. For a moment she feared the worst, but then a lone figure stumbled into view. It was one of the riders they had seen earlier in the valley. But he was wounded and struggling to stay upright. The Apache man lowered his spear slowly, watching the stranger fall to his knees. Blood stained the man's sleeve, and his breathing was uneven. The forgotten daughter stepped out cautiously, unsure whether to help or hide. The rider raised a shaking hand and pointed back, toward the ridge where the forest grew darker. He managed to say that the group behind him had split up, and some had planned to drive the widowed Apache deeper into the woods to corner him. He said they had been arguing among themselves, and that things turned violent when he tried to stop them. The rider looked ashamed, explaining that he only wanted to warn others and not take part in the trouble these men caused. He had broken away, hoping to reach the Apache before the others did. The widowed Apache listened carefully, asking where the rest of the riders were now. The wounded man warned that they were not far, and that the group had grown desperate after running low on supplies. They were hunting anything they could find, including the forgotten daughter if they discovered her with him. She felt the familiar cold fear rise in her chest again, but the Apache man placed a steady hand on her arm. Grounding her, he told the rider to rest and said he would decide what to do next. The stranger thanked him with a tired nod before collapsing beside the boulder. The forgotten daughter helped give him water while the Apache man checked the trees again. This time, however, he did not look worried. Instead, he looked determined, as if something had shifted inside him. He said the forest was no place to fight with someone wounded in their care. He said they needed to move back toward the valley, not to the lodge, but to a place only he knew. A place where the land itself could protect them. He helped the riders stand, and together they began the slow walk through the dark woods. The forgotten daughter stayed close, holding on to the Apache man's arm whenever the path grew uneven. The journey was long, But the world looked different under the rising moon. The trees opened into a hidden clearing surrounded by natural stone walls and thick river brush, creating a quiet hollow untouched by the troubles of the frontier. The Apache man said this place had been used long ago by his people when storms came. It was safe, sheltered. It's nearly impossible to find without knowing the land. They built a small fire, enough for warmth, but not wide enough to draw attention. The wounded rider rested while the forgotten daughter helped the Apache gather herbs he had shown her earlier. She crushed them carefully and pressed them against the rider's injury, hoping to ease his pain. The Apache man watched her with quiet appreciation, noticing the gentleness in her hands and the way she tried so hard despite the fear in her heart. As the night faded into morning, the tension in the air slowly eased. The rider said the group of dangerous men would likely scatter by sunrise, especially after turning against each other. He believed they were too divided and too desperate to stay together. The Apache man agreed, but remained cautious. He said they would wait until the sun was high before returning to the valley during that time. The forgotten daughter finally felt herself breathe freely again. She sat near the river brush, listening to the water trickling beneath the rocks. The Apache man sat beside her, and for the first time since everything began, he could speak without fear pressing against them. She asked him if he regretted helping her. He shook his head gently and said he did not regret a single moment. He told her that before she walked into his life, he had lived in silence for too long. He said grief had shaped his days until she showed him something he had forgotten, something warm and alive. She felt her eyes sting as she listened. He added that protecting her had awakened a purpose he thought he lost when his wife passed away. The forgotten daughter lowered her gaze. Touched by the sincerity in his voice, she confessed that she had never felt wanted before meeting him. She said his kindness had given her a place to breathe again, a place where she no longer felt invisible. She admitted she feared losing that feeling if danger tore them apart. He reached for her hand with a gentle touch, telling her that fear meant she cared. And caring meant she was alive in a way the world could not take from her. She held on to his hand, finding comfort in the strength of his grip. When the sunlight finally spilled across the clearing, filling the space with warmth, the Apache man said it was safe to return. The wounded rider stood with their help, thanking them for their care. He said he would return to another settlement far from the dangerous men he once traveled with. The Apache man gave him a small pouch of herbs for healing, and the rider left quietly, promising to warn others about the trouble in the valley, the forgotten daughter, and the widowed. Apache began their journey back toward the lodge. The forest felt calmer now, the shadows no longer hiding danger, but guiding them softly toward the open valley. When they reached the edge, overlooking the cedar hills, she saw the lodge still standing, peaceful against the warm glow of morning. She felt relief wash over her. As they walked closer, she realized she no longer feared the valley. She no longer feared the town or the people who judged her. She had found strength through the trials she faced beside him, and she carried that strength in her heart now. The Apache man opened the door of the lodge and stepped aside, inviting her in as though she belonged there. She looked at him, unsure if he truly meant it. He nodded softly, saying there was no reason for her to return to a place that never cared for her. He said she had a home now if she wanted it, a place where she could grow roots instead of wandering in circles. Her heart swelled and tears filled her eyes. No one had ever offered her a home before. She accepted, stepping inside the lodge with a small smile. The warm scent of cedar and earth wrapped around her, and she felt a sense of belonging settle into her bones. The widowed Apache followed her inside, knowing his days of loneliness were finally ending. Together they rebuilt the lodge, planted herbs near the river, and let the valley become a place of healing instead of fear. In time, the people in the nearby town heard tales of the brave Apache man who helped stop the trouble that passed through the valley. They also heard about the forgotten daughter who found her place in the world beside him. The whispers of judgment slowly faded, replaced by quiet respect. Some even visited the lodge to trade or ask for help, and she greeted them with calm confidence that would have surprised her younger self. The valley grew peaceful again, blessed by their presence. The wind that once carried warnings now carried stories of hope, courage, and love born from hardship. The forgotten daughter found joy in the simple days, and the widowed Apache found light where there had once been silence. Their love became a gentle reminder that even in the harsh old American frontier, beauty could grow from broken ground. And together, they built a life stronger than the storms that once threatened to tear them apart.